And well, Wednesday's February 17th meeting of the Great Neighborhoods Committee. My name is Malcolm Graham, member of the Charlotte City Council representing District 2, and I will be chairing the committee meeting today. I want to take this opportunity to welcome the viewing public for being with us. And at this time, I'd like to have all the council members who are members of the committee and our one guest, Councilmember Johnson, to introduce themselves for us.
Good morning, Braxton Winston, serving at large and as a committee member.
Tarek Bakari, committee member.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
All right, I think that's everyone. Mayor Pro Tem will not be with us today, and Councilmember Wallington will be joining us shortly. And so we can have staff to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Warren Wooten, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
This is Willie Ratchford with Community Relations.
Sean Heath, City Manager's Office.
Pamela Weidman, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Jane Talon, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Thank you,
Anna
everyone.
Schloinis, City Attorney's Office.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, everyone. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome Sean to his first Great Neighborhood Committee meeting. Sean will be our staff liaison from the City Manager's Office to this committee going forward. And so I'd like to welcome him. Had a great conversation with him earlier in the week, and I just look forward to working with him as we go to the business of our committee. The agenda is before you. We're going to make some adjustments to it in terms of the order. The first order would be basically the nuisance abatement. Then we'll follow that with fair housing. And then the last item will be the source of income discrimination. And I'll turn it over to Director Weidman to introduce the first topic.
Again, Pam Weidman, Housing and Neighborhood Services, and again, I want to welcome Sean as our staff from the City Manager's Office. As Mr. Graham has said, today we have 3 items before you. 2 of them are for informational purposes, and then the one of them is for action if the committee desires to do so. And so we're going to start with the nuisance abatement. Jane Talon, our code enforcement manager, and as a reminder, this came to the committee in late 2020, and today we want to provide you an update on the work. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jane.
Good afternoon, everybody. We'll start with a quick review. Again, this referral came before the Great Neighborhoods Committee, and it was to discuss the non-residential building code. Next slide, please. The specific committee referral was to consider how to address opportunities, challenges, and consequences in conducting nuisance abatement with consideration of mitigating any potential housing displacement. On September 16th, this topic was introduced to the committee, and our next steps that we identified was in regards to the non-residential building code and reviewing that. On November 18th, we met with the committee and discussed the timeline for review. Next slide, please. As a reminder, the city adopted the non-residential building code in 2009, and it was implemented in 2010. The code enforces minimum standards for commercial businesses, and it ensures that commercial businesses are safe and sanitary structures. Inspections occur as a result of a citizen complaint, a public agency referral, or a field observation, and the enforcement of the non-residential building code mirrors our housing code enforcement. As with the housing code, we can bring a case before city council and request a structure be repaired or a structure be demolished. Next slide. This is a review of the non-residential building code process. You have seen this slide before. We start on day one when we receive a complaint or a request for access. We then conduct our inspection, and then we allow the owner to make repairs. We hold a hearing, and then after that hearing is held, if the repairs are still outstanding, we'll issue what is called a findings of fact and order, and that is either issued as a repair or as a demolition, and that is determined by the cost of the repairs versus the value of the structure. Once we issue the repair order or demolition order, we re-inspect 30 days later. Either the case is brought into compliance at some time, or we proceed with action to either issue a civil penalty, to take the owner to environmental court, or even potential interim action by the city council. Next slide. So as you tasked us with a review of the ordinance, we have been meeting with a stakeholders group. I believe we've had 3 meetings to date to discuss potential changes to the NRBC ordinance, and there are several listed on this slide. These are the ones that are under consideration for change or addition to the ordinance. The first one is civil penalties. We are in discussion with the stakeholders group regarding the current civil penalty, which is $500 for the first day and $50 for each additional day. We don't have consensus from the stakeholders yet. We have several stakeholders that feel that the civil penalty should remain as it is. And then I think you would get the information from city staff that with the increase in civil penalties to our housing code, we believe that there should be an increase to the civil penalties to the non-residential building code. And that is largely due to the fact that the housing code penalties now exceed what we have for the NRBC code. And if you recall, our housing code is $100 per day. It's a flat fee for every day the property's in non-compliance. So an example of that would be if we were to issue a 30-day noncompliance for a housing case, they would receive a $3,000 civil penalty for that month. If we issued a civil penalty for noncompliance on a non-residential case, they would receive a penalty of $2,950. So we would contend that from a city perspective, we would at least like it to be the same as our housing code, but we would also contend that because non-residential buildings are a more intensive use than a housing code case, that should probably be higher than our current housing code. Some other standards that we're looking at are related to maintenance standards. We would like to add the requirement for heating and cooling and ventilation systems to work as intended where they are installed. This was something that we included in our housing code when we did our recent rewrite, and so we would like that to be consistent through our non-residential code as well. We also want to clarify some life safety systems, and this is specific to fire systems. We want to include in the NRBC ordinance a provision that discusses if staff inspect a unit and determine that there is a fire system that could be out of compliance, that we will make that referral to the Charlotte Fire Department so that they can come out and inspect and ensure that that structure meets standards for their safety. In addition, we want to do some clarification around our electrical safety requirements. We want to clarify that doors be operable. We already require that windows be operable, and we want to add some requirements regarding rafters and joists. In addition, another piece that we want to add is related to wall and ceiling coverings. And where we see this to be a challenge is in our inspections when we are at motels. They don't currently have the same requirements as you would have in a dwelling. And I think we would contend that some people use motel rooms as their dwelling, so we feel that they should be required to have requirements around wall and ceiling coverings. Next slide, please. So we are talking about the timeline here. So we identified our stakeholders. We've been conducting those meetings, and today we're here to provide an update to you. Starting February 24th, we are going to begin our community engagement meetings. And so we will have 4 of those. It will include a social media, a press release. We'll be sending information out to our economic development department to get their assistance in reaching out to our business owners. Between February 24th and March 4th, we'll collect our feedback from our public sessions and our online survey. We then anticipate on April 12th to have a public hearing, and then on April 26th to ask council to vote on the standards that are presented. And I believe that will also include one more visit back to the Great Neighborhoods Committee in March so that we can tie up any loose ends that you have. And can we get the next slide, please? I jumped ahead a little bit. I got ahead of the days before you guys got to see them. But that is our plan, and we'll take any questions.
Before the presentation, I open up the floor for questions from the committee. Are there any questions? Well, Jane, I think you did a very good job. There is no questions from the committee, so we look forward to following your schedule and getting updated along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Our second item on the agenda is the Fair Chance Housing Update, and I think Willie Radford from our Community Relations Committee is here to speak on that. Ms. Whiteman, do you want to introduce the topic?
Sure. Again, this is another update. We were before you, I believe it was in November, and we introduced this topic. This came out of the Housing Task Force that the mayor appointed this summer, and this topic came up. And so what you'll hear today is a tag team approach. Again, Mr. Radford, he and his office are the lead on this one. But again, we simply want to provide you an update on the work that we've done, and Mr. Radford will share some of the conversations that we've had with the Reentry Alliance as we go through this presentation. So with that, I'll turn it to Mr. Radford.
Thank you, Pam Whiteman. I appreciate that. Let me start off by thanking you, Chairman Graham, and the other members of the Great Neighborhoods Committee for this opportunity for the staff team to give you an update on what we are now calling fair chance housing. You all will recall back in November when this was initially presented, we had framed it as reentry housing. However, based on some feedback that we got from you all regarding that name, we have revisited that, and then we've decided to call this fair chance housing, which is probably a more accurate descriptor of what we're seeking. As you can see from the briefing objectives here, and to Ms. Whiteman's point, we will have a tag team approach with regards to the presentation today. And we'll start off with me providing, we're talking about the direction that we received from you all back in November of 2020 when we made the initial presentation to you. I'll talk a little about our background with regard to the Charlotte Fair Housing Ordinance, HUD guidance, and the requests that we've gotten from Reentry Housing Alliance. We have done some additional research, and Warren from Housing and Neighborhood Services will provide you information on the research that we have completed. In addition to that, we've also done additional research on criminal background legislation, and Anna from the City Attorney's Office will provide information on that. Pam Whiteman will then provide some information on the landlord survey that we've conducted since we last met. And then I'll close out by talking about our recommendations for a path forward to address this work. I should also mention that we have had meetings with the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, and we have gotten feedback from them, and Warren Wooten, again, will provide that information to you all. With regards to the direction, you all may recall back in November, you asked us to do three things after that initial presentation, that we survey landlords and gather other data to determine current practices, that we develop and enhance education opportunities, and that we consider additional recommendations that you all might consider with this particular work around fair chance housing. Next slide, please. And so we'll start off with the current Fair Housing Ordinance, Charlotte Fair Housing Ordinance, which is enforced by the staff of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Community Relations Committee. And as you all are aware, it provides, it prohibits discrimination and access to housing in our community based on race, religion, color, sex, national origin, familiar status, which means that you have children in your possession who are 18 years of age or younger, or in other words, you cannot discriminate against families with children, and of course, disability. The Community Relations Committee investigates anywhere from 30 to 40 fair housing complaints a year. And in about half of those, we have reason to believe that the discrimination actually occurred. However, when it comes to fair chance housing or discrimination based upon criminal background, in the past 5 years, we've only investigated one such complaint. And in that particular case, we had a situation where a Black female was denied housing due to a 30-year-old conviction. We actually ended up successfully resolving this complaint. And in the end, the respondents provided a letter of apology to the complainant. And she also got a $6,500 cash settlement. And then the respondent also made policy changes, not only to the housing that they administer here in Charlotte, but across the country. I think they have 68 properties, and they changed their policy to indicate that they will not have a blanket policy of indicating that you cannot rent from them simply because you had a criminal background. Next slide, please. Under the Fair Housing Ordinance, all rental applicants in Charlotte have a right to come to the Community Relations Committee if they feel that they are victims of housing discrimination, and we will receive their complaints. And if we determine that they are jurisdictional, we will investigate those complaints. And this is due in part because the ordinance appoints the Community Relations Committee as the administering body for investigation of fair housing complaints here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Next slide. Under the ordinance, CRC can investigate complaints based on a criminal background based on HUD guidance. And what you all should know is that criminal background is not a specific protected class in federal fair housing law or in our law. We do, however, have a law that has been certified as being substantially equivalent to the federal law. And we also have a memorandum of understanding between the Community Relations Committee and HUD, whereby fair housing complaints received locally are investigated by this office. Now, as I indicated, criminal background is not a protected class. However, we can investigate such complaints based on guidance from HUD that deals with what we call the adverse impact theory for investigating discrimination. And what that means is that you may have an entity or landlord or an apartment complex that has a policy that on its face is neutral. However, once that policy is actually implemented, it has an adverse impact on people of color. And so when it comes to criminal background, to have a policy that says we will not rent to people with criminal backgrounds sounds innocuous and neutral. However, it has an impact on an adverse impact on people of color because people of color are disproportionately impacted in our criminal justice system. And so you end up with what many might see as unintentional discrimination, but it is still discrimination. In 2016, HUD actually issued guidance indicating that we can investigate local fair housing complaints based upon this adverse impact theory. And the primary purpose of the guidance is to end practices of landlords having denied applicants based on a criminal record when the denial might in fact violate the ordinance. In other words, you just can't have a blanket policy. And this particular guidance applies not only to landlords who might receive HUD funding, it applies to all landlords here in Charlotte. Next slide, please. One of our partners in this process has been the Reentry Housing Alliance, and they have made the requests that are listed on the slide here. Primarily, they want us to look at the possibility of increasing landlord and tenant education and awareness of potential discrimination based upon criminal background. So they want us to be more intentional and active in providing education and outreach on these activities. They want to assure that citizens who may be impacted by this have a right to file a complaint. They want us to look at and have conversations with landlords about their use of criminal backgrounds in decision making and how they might avoid being in violation of fair housing law, and that we continue to investigate complaints as they increase due to the increase in education and outreach that we will provide in the coming months as it relates to criminal background and fair housing. And so that's phase one of what they're asking for. There is a phase two. And so there's some possibility that we may end up coming back to you all to actually consider amending the local fair housing ordinance to add protections to people with criminal backgrounds if, as a result of phase one in this education and outreach, there's no improvement in landlord compliance, and we see we still may have some experiences where landlords may be in violation of the federal and the local law. And so that's pretty much our background and our introduction. I'm going to ask now if Warren will talk to you all about some of the research that we've conducted in North Carolina as well as in other places. And after Warren, Anna will then talk to you about the legislation research that she has conducted. So Warren, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ratchford, and good to be with you again, committee. So we're going to start off, we followed a similar process in our research that we did with the SOID research that we presented to you several weeks back. We're going to start with this slide here on research here in our North Carolina partner cities. What we found when we reached out to these 5 cities is that 2 of them are really not doing anything in regards to fair chance housing. Durham responded in that they do investigate under the fair housing law, under race, fair chance housing issues with justice-involved individuals, and they had 1 of those cases in the last 5 years. You will also see that Greensboro does the same thing. They investigate this under their current fair housing ordinance, and they've investigated 2 cases in the last 3 years. Raleigh makes referrals to their local reentry council, and Greensboro set up a special hub, a city-sponsored hub that I'm going to talk about on the next slide to assist justice-involved individuals. So next slide, please. So here we have, these are, what we found in our work here is that housing authorities have gotten engaged in this issue quite heavily. And so you'll see here a list of several housing authorities, and I'm not going to read this slide to you, but a lot of these housing authorities are doing work assisting justice-involved individuals get back into housing. And so our research group thinks that is also one of the paths forward here is working with Livian around how fair housing challenges and housing options. Next slide, please. So here you'll see the peer cities that we researched. We researched and got responses from 10 peer cities. 8 of those have no fair chance housing ordinances, and 2 of them did, which are Washington and Michigan. Washington's slide was where they added the protected class to their existing ordinance. And then Michigan, it's a separate policy that they adopted in 2018 that prevents landlords from asking about criminal background until they have pre-approved the tenant for the unit. Next slide, please. So here I'm going to turn the presentation over to Anna Shloines in the manager's in the attorney's office to talk about litigation.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I think Willie referred to my research as legislation research. I would actually say it's the litigation research component of this. As you'll see on this slide, there isn't really a whole lot of reported cases on this topic around the country. Of particular note was Wisconsin, which had 2 cities and a county enact fair chance ordinances that weren't challenged through the court system, but the state legislature in Wisconsin specifically repealed those ordinances and also preempted localities from adopting any ordinances that would limit a rental property owner from considering certain types of information, including criminal background, during a tenant screening process. The 2 reported cases that related to fair chance ordinances that have been adopted by municipalities were in Minnesota and Washington. In both of those, there were landlords that challenged, and as you can see in Minnesota, the court denied an injunction sought by the landlords, but the landlords have appealed as of December 1st, and we don't know the outcome yet of that appeal. Washington, Seattle had a similar situation. A landlord challenged the ordinance. The ordinance was upheld by the state court, and then Seattle appealed, and the appeals court sent it back to the trial court for reconsideration. We also don't know the outcome of that at this point. There were several federal cases that were brought under the Fair Housing Act, but those were not related to fair chance ordinances that had been adopted. Those were disparate impact cases, as Willie has alluded to, under the 2016 HUD guidance. So they were actually disparate impact of criminal background tenant screening, as it had a disparate impact on the protected class of race and national origin. And I'll turn it over to Willie, I believe.
Actually,
We're
Anna,
going to have Pam come on board now to talk about our survey information.
About that.
so good afternoon, committee. I'll walk you through the survey, and this survey, we kind of handled it in a similar fashion as we did the source of income survey, because we were recognizing survey for fatigue, and so we tried to get as much into the survey as we could. But you will see here, we surveyed a similar group of people. We surveyed landlords who would receive city funds for our rental assistance program. We surveyed social serves landlord pool, which is about 4,467 people, and property owners. We also tapped into the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association and of about 134 members there. So we surveyed a total of 4,944 people. I will tell you up front that we got a low return, so we can, we can speak to what we believe the significance of the survey was, but we sent the survey out. And we received the numbers that we did receive. We asked similar questions. What's the size of the real estate portfolio? Wendy, if you could go to the next slide for me, please, and just keep going, and I'll walk through the 7 questions. We asked, what is the size of the rental real estate portfolio? And again, this was good because we got to survey property owners who had from 1 to over 1,000 properties. You can see that most of the returns we got were 72% were those smaller property owners. And then you can see how the next largest sampling we got was, we received were property owners between 101 to 500 units. We also asked, does your portfolio primarily consist of single-family or multifamily? Again, you can see here the results there. 85% of the folks who had up to 50 units had the single-family portfolio. You can see the results there with folks who had 51 to 500, and then over 500 units, which you can see that people who did have over 500 units, most of those were multifamily units, so the apartment complexes. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. We asked, do you rent to people with criminal records? You can see the results there. The people who had mostly single-family homes, 50 units in their portfolio, 46% of them said yes, they do. With the 50 up to 500, 51 up to 500, 53% of them said that they are likely to rent. And then the property owners with units over 500, 50% of them said that they are likely to rent as well. And so we went on to ask them, are you aware of the HUD's 2016 guidance? 50% of them were, 50% of them were not. So immediately that leads us to there needs to be more education about HUD's 2016 guidance. We asked what their evaluation criteria is when renting to people with criminal records. And they said everything from it depends on the nature of the crime and the time that has elapsed, that the potential renter's honesty about the criminal background, paying special attention, that they paid special attention to felony convictions, drug convictions, and violent crimes, no history of sexual or violent crimes, drug-related crimes or misdemeanors, and then criminal backgrounds, again, that people expressed are only one element, that the applicant must also have good credit as well. We asked if there were any criminal offenses that they did not accept, and if so, what those were. And you can see there, sexual crimes, crimes against children, drug-related and violent offenses, and then history indicating habitual crimes. If you go to the next slide for me, please. And so then we started asking them, what do they believe to be the benefits and challenges of deferring inquiry into criminal convictions until after the rental applicants have qualified? And so I think the overwhelming things that you see here is this would benefit people who have served their time and give them a second chance, or as we've called it, a fair chance at housing. The benefits landlords who may realize that many formerly incarcerated people, they're now honestly employed, and that, again, they've served their time. And then another benefit is that it's fair to first look at the credit and not base a decision solely on background. So really to look at credit and rental history. We asked, what do you believe are the benefits and challenges of, the challenge. So just talk to you about the benefits. You can see the challenges there. And one of the challenges that I would point out that people said that the proposal is that some people believe that it's a replication of HUD's guidance. There was concern about the smaller impact, the impact to smaller landlords. And I won't read all these to you, but you can see that there were a number of challenges that people believed from this question, or that were identified from this question. We also asked, what do you believe to be the benefits and challenges of allowing applicants to provide evidence of reporting errors, rehabilitation and mitigating factors to convictions? And again, the benefits. It's what we all want to do. It's a great way to give someone a fair chance or a second chance. It would help landlords see that, the prospective tenant, that they're trying to reacclimate into society. It's an opportunity for the applicant to advocate for themselves, And it's an opportunity for folks reacclimating to be a good resident or to be a good tenant, and that overall, it's fair and it's reasonable. In terms of some of the challenges that were identified, similar to what you heard with the source of income, there was the city should provide financial guarantees to the landlords, determining what previous criminal fixes and mitigating factors are acceptable. And then one of the things that stood out was that, some property owners believe that they are not educated to make these decisions, therefore the decisions might be subjective. If you go to the next slide for me, please. As was mentioned, we heard from the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association as well. It is our understanding, based on their response, that they too have met with the Reentry Housing Alliance, that an opportunity would be that landlords don't have a good understanding of the current HUD guidelines, and so therefore education is essential and is needed for both landlords and applicants so that they know that they can have these investigated currently. There was some discussion about landlords should not be responsible for determining whether or not an applicant is reformed. Landlords should do a better job of informing applicants of disqualifying backgrounds. And then the landlord, again, should be applicants, should be proactive by being honest and asking the landlord what criminal backgrounds offenses would disqualify. And again, those are the results that we received from the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association. As it relates to affordable housing developers, we reached out to them as well. And what we learned, and I guess was reiterated through reaching out to them, number one, that affordable housing developments, these are particularly developers that you all grant housing trust fund allocations to. They are very familiar with lots of regulatory and HUD guidelines, and so they hire property management companies who are also well versed in these, and they follow these HUD guidelines currently. And then the other thing I would point out is that they're very familiar with the challenges of people with criminal backgrounds having obtaining affordable housing. And so what they tend to do is they partner with organizations who are assisting these people so that they can work collaboratively to get them housed. And so based on what Mr. Ratchford had talked to you about the reentries, the housing reentries, Housing Alliance request, I think that request is built off of some of the research that we just shared with you. And with that, I will turn it back to Mr. Ratchford to talk about the path forward. Mr. Ratchford?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Whiteman. So members of council, based upon the research that we've done, the information that we've gotten as a result of the surveys, some conversations that we've had with some of the partners who are working with us on this particular issue, we have several suggestions as a path forward that we will now share with you. And the first is that the Community Relations Committee will continue investigating complaints as they are received, and we will accept these complaints on a case-by-case basis because they all are different, and some, based upon our initial analysis, would be jurisdictional, while there may be some that are not. And so we'll do that on a case-by-case basis. That we continue to be updated on education and outreach materials to incorporate fair chance housing best practices and implementing locally by playing this up during April, which is Fair Housing Month every year. We have a lot of tenants' rights materials and flyers and brochures and fair housing flyers and brochures that we will keep updated, and we'll make an intentional effort to get this information out into the community such that everyone is educated and understand their rights under fair housing law, including the rights that one may have if they have a criminal background. We're also looking into we've looked into translation into other languages And we've had several opportunities that we're following up on right now to leverage international organizations for outreach. We will continue to expand and create new partnerships. As I mentioned earlier, one of our primary partnerships with this work now is reentry housing. But I would be remiss not to mention the Exodus Foundation, the Sheriff's Department, the Police Department, and the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, as well as others. We want to identify the magnitude of the problem. Right now, as I had mentioned last week regarding SOED discrimination, we don't have a real good feel for the extent of this particular discrimination in our community. And it's one of those things that's like air. You don't see it, but you know that it's out there. And we think with the education efforts that we will engage in, this will give us a better opportunity to understand the extent that this discrimination may or may not exist in our community. Next slide, please. Recently, the governor's task force for racial equity and criminal justice has submitted recommendations for addressing equity in the criminal justice system. And we believe that that inequity is one of the reasons that people of color may be adversely impacted when it comes to fair housing choice. So we'll be working with that task force and others to see how we might get some of those recommendations implemented. We will continue to research other states for best practices. We'll monitor evolving changes at the federal level. And we would like to be able to come back to you all to provide continuous updates until such time as we have a better feel on the business case for addressing criminal background discrimination in our community. And with that, at this time, we will take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Willie, and thank you, Ms. Wyman and team for the presentation. A lot of great information there for the committee to consider. I really enjoyed the last slide forward in terms of the recommendations, specifically around promotion and educating our community, and really would love to have some sidebar comments if we move forward. How we would do that. I believe education is really the key to a lot of this. I open up the floor for questions from the committee, and I'll ask the first question while those get queued up. Ms. Wyman, there are a number of organizations that are dealing with this issue on the ground, grassroots organizations. Have you been talking with them, and what's their feedback from? Where the path forward?
So Mr. Graham, I will invite Mr. Ratchford to chime in as well. Again, as we presented to you, we've heard from the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, and then just yesterday, we had a very good meeting with Mr. Schrader, who is with the local Reentry Housing Alliance. We had a meeting with him and two other members of his team. And so when I say we, that was Mr. Ratchford and myself and Ms. Shalornez. And we talked for about an hour, and they supported this path forward and reiterated that there are a number of, that one of the issues is a lack of education, right? So it's a lack of education on both sides, and that they really like that and support doing that work. The other thing that they pointed out is that in terms of that education, and we all agreed, is that it's not just education once people are out or released from incarceration. It is how do we work with people before they are released, and so they understand what are some of their rights when they're coming out. So those are the organizations that I'm aware of that we've talked to at this point, and I'm not sure if Mr. Ratchford has anything to add.
Mr. Graham, I would just add to what Ms. Wyman has said, especially the partnership and the meeting that we had with Reentry Housing. They recognize the need to do this thing correctly the first way, the first time around, and so they've indicated that they are on board with the path that we think we should take to actually get this work done. And to Pam's point, perhaps the biggest thing that we can do for this community is the education and outreach, because this seems to be one of those areas where people in the community who may have rights as it relates to criminal background discrimination don't understand or do not know about those rights. And so for us to do flyers and brochures, and we also talked about public service announcements and getting on local radio and television to create a comprehensive program to educate the community. And our sense is that if once we do that, if the problem is as bad as some of us think that it might be, people will start to call in to ask for possible investigations of their complaints, and that will give us a better feel and picture about the extent of this problem, which we will in turn bring back to you all.
Thank you for that response, Ms. Whiteman. And Will, I think you're absolutely right. We really need a comprehensive educating campaign that goes beyond just brochures, right? It's public service announcements, billboards, it's radio, it's trying to get the message across to a wide audience on TV, et cetera. So I'm very interested in that for sure. And again, I think that the manager has heard me said this before, how we also utilize our own public access channel to communicate messages to the community that we think are valuable and important. I recognize Councilmember Winston.
Can we just go back one slide, 27? I think this overall conversation and this overall topic, it mirrors, I think, the conversation that we're about to continue with source of income discrimination. I think we need to figure out, something bold that gets a lot of people housed, and we're going to have to, I think outside of our box. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. I think, as we continue on down the road with source of income discrimination, I think it is important that this conversation or work is not happening just in parallel, but in a way that intersects when it makes sense. Thank you.
I think that's a very wise observation, Councilmember Winston. There are a lot of intersection between the two. Any additional questions from the committee? Councilwoman Johnson.
Thank you. I'm with Councilmember Winston as far as taking action. I would challenge the reporting from Mr. Ratchford, and he did a great job of presenting, but to say that there's only been one complaint at the city level, I could understand that. As we talked about last week, there's only been 3 complaints with source of income discrimination, when we know it's out there. So I don't know if we're obtaining the proper information. There are other subject matter experts. There's Ken Schrader and the Reentry Housing Alliance. Mecklenburg County has a reentry partners. There's the persons involved in criminal justice group with the Continuum of Care that I'm a part of. So although the city might not have the information, this is a problem. And we were also presented, Chairman Graham, at the Affordable Housing Task Force for the COVID recovery. We got some great information there, and I was looking for the graph presented by Tara Peel with Social Serve, that we know this is a barrier for many individuals. So I would say, rather than continuing to talk about it or think, or the education, there has to be action. There has to be ordinances, not just for landlords who are applying for the tax credit, but receiving any city funding, such as the TIG or, any development funds. I think there's an opportunity for the city to actually do something and to continue talking about it and trying to gather information when the information is already out there. Now, if the city doesn't have it, I understand that, but this is a conversation that, that has been had for a long time. So I'm with Councilmember Winston to take bold action, not just on this, but also on the source of income discrimination as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Any additional questions? Seeing none, I think, Ms. Whiteman, this was for informational purpose only. Do we need to take any action on it?
You're correct, Mr. Graham. It was an informational update for you all on the path forward.
Okay. Thank you for the report. And we'll go to our last item on the agenda for today, which is source of income discrimination. Ms. Wyman, I'll let you tee it up.
Thank you again, Mr. Graham. This is a continuation of the discussion that, and the information that we presented to you. I believe it was at your February 8th strategy session. And so at that point, it was referred back to the committee. And so this is your first committee since that meeting. And we just have, if you'll go to the next slide for me, much of this information will be the same that you heard at your February 8th meeting. Again, just to remind you all what the recommendations are. Again, adopt a policy requiring mandatory acceptance of housing choice vouchers and other forms of rental subsidy in all city-supported housing. What we learned, what we heard you all say at the February 8th meeting is you wanted us to look into two things, and we're in the process of doing that. I don't have any answers for you today, but we're in the process of looking to see if, I think Ms. Johnson, you pointed out, could we somehow tie this to our rezoning cases where there's affordable housing. And then I think it was also pointed out that to look into, could we also tie this to any TIGs that are being granted? So again, don't have any answers for you today, but we're in the process of working with our colleagues in planning and ED. We'll be working through that to bring you back accurate information. Again, we want to monitor changes at the federal level, and you all work with the local delegation here to create, if you all desire, this ad hoc group where we would look at the program enhancements, that suggested program enhancements and any other enhancements that may evolve through this process. And then number 4, it was consider amending the Fair Housing Ordinance if the proposed enhancements and process improvements are not successful. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please, Wendy. What is new, and we clearly understood that the time frame that was suggested is just not tenable. And so what we've come back with you are two things related to the timeline. Is we've come back to rather than 24 months, we want to be back in front of you at the end of this year, December 2021. You may recall that was the December 22. So we want to be back in front of you the end of this year. And then as we go along the way, what we'd like to do is we'd like to bring you updates, periodic updates. And you see we built those into the schedule. And then, again, not a lot of new information. There was some questions, some data that you guys had raised. And so what I wanted, if you all have any more suggestions for data or things that you didn't see, that you thought you would have seen or would have liked to have seen, please let us know. And so the next steps would be council approval and appointment of this ad hoc advisory group so we can get to work and start to do the work. We would then convene based on your approval. And again, work May through December, implementing and monitoring progress, bringing you guys back periodic reports as we go along the way, and then have a final report out to you in December of 2021. And so with that, Mr. Graham, that concludes the report.
Thank you, Ms. Whiteman. As a part of this conversation, and going back to the last council meeting, there were two voices that kept coming out. One, Lavidian, formerly known as the Charlotte Housing Authority, as well as the Greater Apartment Association. So I invited both of their CEOs to our committee meeting today, and I told I would give them 3 minutes each to kind of provide any input that they wanted to the. The Kim Graham is here from the Greater Apartment Association, as well as Felton Meacham with Lavidian. And Ms. Graham, welcome to our committee. And do you have any comments that you want to pass on to the committee? Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Graham. Thank you, other council members, and Ms. Whiteman and Mr. Heath. I want to start by saying that the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association's members accept most forms of income, including Social Security, disability, alimony, and other documented income sources. I guess the problem at hand is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. That's the major issue for landlords, and in particular, the HUD-required Housing Assistance Payments Contract and Tenancy Addendum, or the HAP contract. Normal lease-ups can happen in as little as 3 days. Under the Housing Choice Voucher Program, lease-ups can take as long as 60 days to get the HAP contract executed, housing quality standard inspection completed, to receive security deposits and first month's rents from the Housing Authority. It's easy for the Housing Authority to terminate the HAP contract at any point in the lease term without advance notice to the landlord, which leaves the landlord essentially in a lurch, having to quickly prepare the unit for re-rental and to find new renters. And even after the end of the lease term, good cause must be shown to the Housing Authority in order to justify repossession of the unit by the owner. That's not the case with a normal rental situation. The Housing Choice Voucher amount doesn't guarantee the full rent, just the portion that the Housing Authority will pay. Landlords are put in a position of having to do twice as much work to collect monthly rent. During the HAP contract term, the rent may at no time exceed the reasonable rent determined by the Housing Authority under HUD guidelines. Rent increases are only at biannual recertifications, and the voucher doesn't cover any gaps with the payment standards. And gaps between reasonable rents and market rents can be several $100s per month. At the end of the day, that lost revenue really adds up. It's difficult to terminate tenancy, as it can only be done for specific reasons under the HAP contract, such as serious or repeated violation of the lease and certain criminal activities or other, quote, good cause. And the owner must maintain the unit in accordance with the housing quality standards and must remedy any alleged deficiencies upon demand by the Housing Authority, even though the condition of the unit may have already been fully compliant with all other local, state, and federal housing regulations. This is just a short list of some of the many issues with the Housing Assistance Program contract. I'm happy to send this list to council members in full or just on this committee. And I'm also happy to answer any questions you might have at this time. And I appreciate you guys giving us the time to just go through the list of concerns with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and in particular the HAP contract.
Thank you, Ms. Graham, for that presentation. Any information you want to share with the committee, you can send it to me, and I'll make sure that the committee. Mr. Meacham, welcome, sir. Felton Meacham, CEO.
Good afternoon.
Formerly Charlotte Housing Authority. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Fantastic. Everybody can hear me? Well, good afternoon, Chair and members of the Greater Neighborhood Committee members. I'd first like to just start out by saying thank you so much for your thoughtful and deliberate consideration on this issue. We're at a critical juncture in the journey that began 3 years ago with myself and other housing providers in the Charlotte Affordable Housing Continuum. As we began the discussion talking about affordable housing and source of income discrimination, also referred to as SOID, and the barriers it proposes to opportunities for upward mobility for families using non-wage sources of income to pay their rent. This issue has been presented over the last couple of months in both the committee and council deliberations as a program issue. To the contrary, source of income discrimination is a people issue. It impacts mothers, fathers, grandmoms, granddads, veterans, students, teachers, and essential employees. As a provider of affordable housing, I just like to also recognize the over 1,300 housing providers that work with us daily to ensure that families have a place to call home. These are families that would be otherwise placed out of the market because they couldn't afford rental housing in the private market. It is clear that there are several barriers that our fellow Charlottesvilleans face when it comes to affordable housing. Our approach in addressing those barriers has been and will continue to be multi-pronged and collaborative. I think as Ms. Wyman has shared with you, and Livian has implemented a series of program enhancements, including process streamlining, monetary incentives, focus on housing provider retention and recruitment. Many of that feedback that we just talked about came from our own and Livian Housing Provider Advisory Committee and work with the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association. However, in addition to program enhancements, we know that the barriers that housing is presented through source of income constitutes a need for a policy action, and a policy action now. As you're aware, Charlotte ranks 50 out of 50 in economic mobility nationwide. Housing choice voucher families have unequal access to neighborhoods that include features that help people climb out of poverty. It perpetuates incidents of intergenerational poverty and intensifies the city's economic mobility crisis. As we've been asking to change the ordinance, I just wanted to make sure that some of the things you just heard from Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, I would say are maybe mischaracterized. We're not asking anyone to change any of their payment standards. We're not asking anyone to change their selection criteria. We're not asking anybody to change their rents or lower their rents. We're basically saying that an individual should not be discriminated against because of the source of their income. And I'll close at this time and open it up to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton. Committee, you have the recommendation in front of you relating from the staff, the amended document that streamlines the outline for the ad hoc group. You've heard as a courtesy from both Ms. Graham and Mr. Meacham in terms of their organizations. The reason why I did that, because we were talking a lot about the Greater Apartment Association, what they thought, the same thing with Lavinian. So I thought it would be really appropriate for you to hear from them yourselves. This issue is in front of the committee, so are there any questions? Mr. Winston.
Thank you both for coming to the committee. As I've talked to you guys both individually and to the community, I definitely think that there is a pathway for us to have a table where we could all sit down and find a common solution. Because I think while we're approaching this from all different angles, I do think there's common ground to be had in the pathway forward. For my committee members, I hope, I know a lot of folks have asked for this interaction to occur. I just hope that we use it and guide it in a powerful way. It's going to be, a lot of this is going to be up to us and how we utilize the tools in front of us. My suggestion, as I said, kind of was getting at during the last strategy session, is my suggestion to us is to go that policy route and change this policy. I think that this is clear, that there's, I don't know how many of you have gone through your email, but there's been some conversation with some community members and the NC School of Government and there is not much guidance here. But this is going to, if there is going to be change, it does look like it's going to have to be dealt with on the local level in collaboration. So I would suggest that we ask our attorneys to go into a closed session and to talk about a legal strategy for changing our local fair housing ordinance with the language that would end source of income discrimination. I think that legal strategy would have to be something that would have to be just that, strategic, and would have to consider the many different directions that it can go. But that, I don't think that step precludes creating that table where we are all working together to find common ground solutions to the challenges that will lie ahead to implementing, getting rid of source of income discrimination. So that is my suggestion to move forward, and I can refine that so that it is, a more of an actionable motion if that's the direction that the committee wants to go.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. I had some questions for Fulton, or for Mr. Meacham.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned in your presentation that Enlivian has an ad hoc committee.
Yes.
Who is on that ad hoc committee, or what entities is on the ad hoc committee?
Right. Roughly almost 3 years ago, we created our own housing provider advisory committee because, again, we want and welcome our partners, which are housing providers at the end of the day, and landlords, to participate and kind of bang on us the issues that our program faces for them. And again, we did the same thing with the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association over the same period of time. And that resulted in basically a lot of, if not all, the improvements and enhancements that we made to the program. One of the biggest things that came out of it was we talked about the financial aspect of it, right? And so I didn't think it was fair either for us to ask landlords to reduce their rent to just take our residents. So what we're doing in the marketplace now is actually paying market rate rent for families to live kind of where they would like to live. And these would probably in most situations in higher opportunity areas. Because of some of the administrative burdens, and I think everybody understands this is a HUD program, it's not the Enlivian program, it's pretty much a HUD program. It's a federal program run locally that we are definitely working with landlords also on the inspections and et cetera, and we reduce those times. But more importantly, because of administrative burdens, we also have a $250 signing bonus for signing up on the program. We have the $1,000 when it comes to risk mitigation on if there are any damages associated with our residents that have left the property, as well as a continuity bonus that when people are turning units at the end of the day, they also get an opportunity for us to pay for those pretty much 14 days that they're turning a unit. So we understand, and we understood from talking to Greater Charlotte Apartment Association and others that there are some administrative burdens, but we moved those financial burdens out of the way. Yes.
I need you to respond directly to the question for me, okay?
Okay, I thought I did.
Okay.
And another question, if you have the numbers in front of you, what's the top rent for a 4-bedroom housing choice voucher?
I do not have that information right in front of me, but with our exception payments, again, we're paying market rate. And I think that's what we should just understand is that throughout the process, we're paying market rate for a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 bedroom.
The reason I asked, because I saw a graph and I'm not able to find it, and it was over $2,000. I think it was $2,700. So it was definitely market rate. Right. How long have you been working with the city on this issue?
I mean, we first started talking about this issue 2017. And so through that process, I know that the board chair at the time had sent an email to City Council. Myself and, Pam Wyman have been discussing this issue, I would say, for many years.
Okay. And last question for you. Does this source of income discrimination ordinance, would it just impact the housing choice voucher recipients, or is this a broad issue for many types of income?
It's a broad issue. I mean, no question that we're the largest housing provider in the city with the Housing Choice Voucher Program. But again, when it comes to persons that are on Social Security, disability payments, people on financial aid, all of those individuals are being discriminated against. And again, I don't know how to qualify when someone asks you, well, how many? I mean, how many does it take, I think, for us to say that discrimination is wrong in all cases and should be eradicated, especially in a city that has 50 out of 50 when it comes to economic mobility. Anything that we can do to make sure that families have an opportunity to live in high opportunity areas, that's what we should be doing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And Chairman Graham, if I can also say, we know now that there are landlords that are discriminating against residents who receive funding through NC Hope for the COVID funding in the city. So this is an issue that I would agree with Councilmember Winston that should be addressed now. And Livian has an ad hoc committee. There was an affordable housing task force that was an ad hoc committee to discuss this. So I don't know what another ad hoc committee, what recommendations they'll bring that we can't implement now. I think this is a critical issue. And I guess that is a question. One of the things in the strategy session was that this would not be something we could enforce. So maybe that's where we spend the time is looking at enforcement options. And like have our legal department look at it to see what enforcement, or should we do this at a local level? So I don't know what an ad hoc committee will do that hasn't already been done.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I recognize Councilmember Bakari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just make a statement, but it's in the form of a question where I want to make sure, I think in its most simple form, here's how I come to understand this. And I want, now that we have all these experts, anyone to challenge me if they disagree with this. And this is all based on the premise of—
Limit the conversation to the council members and the committee.
Okay.
Ms. Graham, as Mr. Meacham were here as invited guests. I want to—
Understood. Then, Mr. Chair, maybe I'll just say this as a statement, and I invite you to correct me, given you're just, in case I've gotten anything wrong. I believe that as a foundation, we can all agree upon, and we do all agree upon, that discrimination of any kind, particularly in sources of income, is not something we should accept. So let's start there. Now, the next step is, what can we do? And what is plausible and achievable? I believe that there are only two real approaches that are viable, and they can be summed up by the stick or the carrot, right? So we've spent a lot of time talking about the stick, which is the ordinance, regulation, and enforcement, and all of that. I strongly believe, based on everything I've learned, that while the stick can be very effective, given that we're a Dillon Rule state, given all the factors that we have here, the most we can do on our own is add some words into an ordinance, and we would be unable to actually enforce it, much like we've seen around the country and other places. So does that mean it's impossible? No. But in order for us to have something that's more than just lip service on this topic from the stick perspective, a group needs to come together and make the most amazing and incredible business case ever on why this is what makes sense, not just because discrimination is the wrong thing, but including all of the unintended consequences, the impacts, what it might do to housing prices and rental prices themselves, all of these things. And they've got to do so very innovatively and go to the General Assembly and go to all the parties we need to enable us to do that stuff. And that has to be a full-time job, basically. Like, someone's got to take that like so seriously and convince a group that would be opposed to that, but could be convinced of it if the right proposition was made. So that's the stick side. I do believe the carrot side is still something that we can do, and without putting, essentially a law in place that we can't do anything about. We could partner and figure out, okay, well, how do we make it easier for folks to do the things that the ultimate outcomes we want? And we have to have a collaboration. I think ad hoc committees are the thing that achieves both of those. One is a little more in our control. We don't need permission. But at the end of the day, I don't know there's anything in between those two paths that's viable. So that's my personal opinion on it right now. Either stick, ordinance, enforceability, and go to Raleigh, and somebody needs to come up with the greatest business case ever concocted, or we figure out how to use market forces and partnerships to make it easier, less headwinds to achieve ultimately what we want. That's how I've come to see the issue. If I'm wrong, I'm glad to be corrected, but I'll just use that as a statement, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Bakari. I'm going to go back to Kim Graham so I can be fair and balanced. Ms. Graham, is a comment?
Thank you, Chairman Graham. I just would like to say a couple of things. One is that we're fortunate to have Enlivian be a member of the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, along with many other affordable housing developers and providers. Last January, we held a source of income roundtable at our building, and we invited Enlivian along with elected officials, along with grassroots organizers and folks who had an interest in this, market rate developers and the like. Fulton mentioned that there's a committee that Enlivian created 3 years ago with stakeholders on it. I would ask, I'm curious to know which market rate rental providers are on that committee, and if they aren't members of the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, I would ask that we would invite some of our fellow members to participate on that. We have some that are deeply rooted in this community, that have a heart for this community, and that will be, I think, very open to these types of discussions.
Thank you, Ms. Graham. Okay, so we're going to focus the conversation back to the committee members. Councilmember Bakari, I think you are right. There's only two paths forward, right? Either we do an ordinance with all the pitfalls that's been illustrated and documented and relayed to us, or we take a look at what's in front of us as a recommendation from the staff that has been amended, that does provide an ad hoc committee of stakeholders throughout the community. We have the opportunity to make sure that it's fair and it's balanced with a charge to move forward. I think everyone on the call agrees that discrimination in any form is wrong, right? I remember as a student using my father's Social Security once he passed as my source of income for an apartment as a student, right? So I get it, I understand it, and notwithstanding the fact that data is not available to correspond to some of the things that we want to do, that's why the committee should be in place, to get the information, to get the data, to do the research in a quick, short period of time. And if it doesn't work, then there's another step that we can take. So I think the proposal that is in front of us is fair, it's balanced, and it can be amended at any time. And so I just think we have something in front of us that makes sense that we all can work with, in addition to, as Ms. Weidman indicated, that we can research other city programs that we have to see if they can be amended to include, like the TAGs and like the Obviously, all those individuals who are involved in our housing trust fund are doing it as well. But just take a look at a comprehensive type of analogy to make sure that we're not missing anything. But we also don't want to walk into quicksand either. So I think the options are pretty clear. Open up for questions. Mr. Winston.
So I think, I think one of the things that we have to cut through is what is reality and what is just rhetoric. On one hand, we're saying if we change the ordinance, that is an unenforceable, just empty words. But in the same kind of in the next sentence, we're also saying that if we change this ordinance, it's going to have a dramatic effect on rents and make housing more unaffordable in the city. So I think we have to actually decide, what is politics here and what is actually reality, because both of those things can't be realistic. If we change the ordinance, maybe one of those things happen, but maybe none of those things happen, and it's actually somewhere in the middle. So can I actually bring up the slide of where the next steps are?
I think staff will do that for you. Also,
Yeah, Wendy, if you could go.
Councilmember Wallington is on the call with us. Welcome, Councilmember Wallington.
Yeah. Wendy, that's the last slide, please. Yep, thank you.
I think it was the one that was presented in our strategy session that had the four steps that you were suggesting, with step 4 being ordinance change.
Yeah, Mr. Winston, I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry. So go to this. I think you want the alternatives that we have. Go back, Wendy, to slide 2, I think it is. Yep, there we go.
Yes. So again, I believe we do step 4 first. I don't know how many times that we can really say this. There is no legislative enabling thing to go up to Raleigh to deal with. The concern is that the market, the industry will take us to court. We'll fight our ordinance change, and that is where the drama is. So I think you put number 4 first. 1, 2, and 3 are steps that you take to deal with what those gripes are. What are the industry gripes, and what are the renters' gripes? It is not about enforcement. The idea isn't about enforcement. What we are trying to figure out is how do we effectively match the practice with the policy. And that's what we do with all types of policy enactments. How do we work together? How do we utilize these other 3 steps to create those common ground approaches that make sure that we are the practice of ending source of income discrimination meets the policy?
I think you're muted, Chairman.
Any other questions? Any other comments?
Yes. Yes, I do. Thank you. Just a clarification point, because you said you disagreed with, again, my perspective, and that's just one. But I don't believe it's
not just your perspective, but like what we're hearing,
Right, I got you. I think my point is, I don't believe it's rhetoric. I believe it's reality. But there's an important point in there, which is I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's a ton of work and the deck is stacked against it, but it can be achieved, but not by just saying, well, we're going to do it. I have no idea if the unintended consequences of this would raise rents. But the point is, so too do the other parties not know that either. So someone's got to do that analysis, make the comprehensive business case, and take it to Raleigh. And what you're saying is absolutely possible, But the scenarios that play out are this. We put the words in there, right? So now it's in an ordinance. So then what happens? Well, one, the minute we go and try to enforce it, the very realistic probability is we are sued. And we could just be sued for having illegal ordinances on the books. I don't know how successful that would be, but we're definitely open for litigation on the other front. But much more importantly than that, right, is the fact that we are flipping off Raleigh. It's like, I don't know how to say it other than we're flipping them off by saying, well, you know what? I know we're not allowed to do this, but we're going to do it anyway, and we'll see what happens. Because that is the wrong approach this city has taken over and over and over again, rather than try to go find advocates, make a case, of which there are going to be advocates up there. I can guarantee you, but somebody's got to do the analysis, because right now you can't be saying, well, I don't know if the rents are going to rise as an unintended consequences or not. I don't know if the enforcement is going to be abused. I don't know if there's going to be injunctions and other things like that that the current stuff provides. The point is, I can't make that case that it will. You can't make that case that it won't. But that just means one thing. We haven't done our homework. So at the end of the day, I am not saying like, oh, we're just going to get out of the stick portion of this and have the ordinance. What I'm saying is it's a lot of work, and someone's got to do the work and champion it and do it the right way. Otherwise, we just gave a bunch of constituents some lip service, made them think we did something when in reality we did nothing.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion.
Point of order. There's two hands in the queue.
All right, so who's recognized? Mr. Bakari just got through speaking. Mr. Winston wishes to make a motion.
I'd like to.
I'm confused, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Wellington, point of order.
Yeah, I was just saying, myself, and it looks like Councilmember Johnson both have our hands up for discussion. I didn't know if you were calling the question or what was happening.
No, Mr. Winston said he wanted to make a motion. I'm looking at my phone. There are two questions. You're right in the queues. Mr. Winston, could you hold that? I'll come back to you third. All right.
Absolutely.
Let's go with the committee member for Councilmember Wellington.
Okay, just real quick on this. And I apologize for being late. I had another meeting. So I'm just trying to catch up, but it looks like the main difference I see here is that the date has changed from December 22 to December 2021 in terms of reconvening on this. So I'm very glad to see that. And as it relates to the conversation that's going on right now, it seems to me that either way, whether we do this 1 through 3 first or whether we do it second, right now it appears that there's nothing happening at the state level that would enable us to do number 4. So either way, it's going to be a confrontation is what it sounds like. And so if that's true, then I just want to make sure I understand the data that we're gathering between now and December 2021 will help us fight in court by establishing a disparity, but it won't tell us whether or not rents are going to be raised or not. So that I just want to make sure that I'm thinking about the approach correctly, because I don't expect that we're going to be able to forecast at the end of this any better than what we can right now. We're just saying that we want to have some defense when we get sued when we put this in place, correct?
So Ms. Watlington.
About that?
Yeah, so Mr. Graham, thank you. If I might weigh in, I think one of the things that we will be able to do through this 10 or 9 months or so of work is, you may recall that during the discussion a couple of weeks ago, is we said we want to work with Inlivian to quantify, to understand how many vouchers are being returned. The ones that are being returned, are they being deployed? Also, if they're not being redeployed, tell us why those vouchers are being returned. And so if through that work we can find out if they're being returned for rent, a non-acceptable rent rate, that will give us more information than we have today. The other thing, Ms. Watlington, I just wanted to make sure you're absolutely right. What you saw changed is the timeline, and we also included periodic updates to the committee as we go toward the December 2021. And we also asked if you had other data or information you wanted us to include or that you would like to see, if you all would let us know that as well.
Okay, great. And so then the only other thing that I'll ask is, under what circumstance would we get to the end of this work and still execute number 4 in December? Because I understand that we do this work, changes are made, we figure out that, okay, the carrot worked, so we maybe don't need a stick. What would be true for the opposite to occur? And that we get to the end of the work and decide we want to move forward with a fair housing ordinance.
So in my mind, as your staff, we would go through this process, and this process, so let me back up. I think the goal, that one of the things that we really all want to see as a result of this is more vouchers being accepted, right? Which equates to more people being housed. In order for us to see that, we'd really need to hear from market rate landlords who have the preponderance of the units, right, to actually house these people. And so I think if we got to the end of this process and we did not see an uptick in that based on metrics that we set, again, that would be a part of the work that we would be doing through this process. We have to know, are there 100 vouchers going unused? Are there 50 going unused? And based on that, we can set some metrics. So I think if we did not see more people being housed, then we would have, the report that Enlivian has done. We would have added our resources. And so all of that, in my mind, and I would invite our attorney to weigh in, would set us up to prove that we've tried here on a local level. There is a desperate impact. And so based on that, this is our business case for having passed this local ordinance.
Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. My concern is that Enlivian has been working with the city since 2017. They are the subject matter experts. They have provided this information to the city. We have emails where, answers regarding return vouchers have been provided to the city. I would say that I would ask the common sense question: what's going to be different today than 18 months or a year from now? If we do not have the jurisdiction to create that law, then, what will be that difference? We can address this from a city ordinance and requiring landlords and developers that take city funding to not discriminate based on income or reentry status. That's the ability that we have today that I don't think that we need another ad hoc committee to take a look at. That's what I would propose to the committee, rather than, because in 18 months, if the state's still not going to be able to pass this law and we're not going to be able to enforce it, nothing's changed except time and more people affected that aren't able to find affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I think it's been downgraded to December of this year, so it's not a full 18 months per the recommendation that's on the floor as we speak. Mr. Winston.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to make a recommendation to full council to go into closed session under attorney-client privilege to discuss a legal strategy of amending our local fair housing ordinance.
Right now?
I would like to make a recommendation out of this committee to full council to consider going into closed session as a full council to discuss under attorney-client privilege a legal strategy to amend our local fair housing ordinance.
Second, I have a question.
Motion's on the table, properly seconded by Councilmember Wallington. Councilmember Wallington has a question.
Yeah, just a quick question on this. In terms of the legal strategy piece, was that already, I was under the impression that piece was already done, not with counsel, but with our attorneys. Is that
We have not discussed the legal strategy that would defend implementation of changes to our fair housing ordinance. And I'm saying, as I've heard in many parts of the discussion, that's what needs to be considered. Again, it's pretty clear that this is not a legislative issue. Not something that the concern is when if we change an ordinance, if business practices find that, and there's probably not the possibility of preemptive legislation, especially not in the next 4 years on this subject matter. So the real concern is if we make changes, if we make significant changes and business practices, and those changes create conditions that businesses or business practices think infringe upon their rights, that we will find ourselves in a legal situation. So I think what we should consider is what are those conditions that change, and how do we deal with those from a legal standpoint? And are there things that we can do to alleviate those things that would possibly prevent us from facing these types of lawsuits? So again, this is a legal issue. That's the conundrum that we're dealing with source of income discrimination and local changes. It's not a legislative issue. So I'm suggesting that we approach it in that way. And I think discussing that with our lawyers is the appropriate step for us to do.
So to that, one more clarifying question. I'm okay seconding this if it does not prevent us from taking the action that's on the table. Like as a parallel path, I'm fine with that. But if you mean it as a step before or in lieu of doing the rest of this, then I would have to withdraw my second.
Any other council member is their prerogative to make any other motion with any other action that this committee takes. So my motion, I don't think precludes any other council member from taking any other action that they see fit.
So you're, Ms. Wallington, there's a motion on the floor. You seconded. Are you withdrawing it?
It sounds like we will still be able to move on the recommendations here, even if we.
That's not what I heard.
Oh.
Well, that's what I believe. So I believe that we can do both if council members see that fit. I think we definitely can go into I think we should go into a closed session to discuss attorney-client privilege, what a legal strategy looks like. A lot of hypotheticals have been put out there, and I think it's that's what you do with your legal team. You do that in a strategic way. So I think that doesn't preclude any other steps. We might decide again in closed session with our legal team that there is no strategy and we don't want to pursue that. So I think I'm with Ms. Watlington in interpreting that we can do both.
All right. So there's a motion on the floor that was made by Mr. Winston, second by Ms. Wallington, that we accept the staff recommendation to move forward. In addition to, we have a conversation with our attorneys about legal options relating to the possibility of passing an ordinance. Am I framing that correctly?
That sounds correct.
Mr. Graham, I don't know if it's appropriate if staff weighs in, but I would love to, if that helps.
Ms. Wyden, sure.
I just want to make sure I'm clear, and I think I am, but what I might suggest, and we're happy to go either way, let me suggest that we hold off on bringing people together, convening a group until we know the outcome of the legal discussion. but we still continue working with our colleagues here in the city to understand what tools we can use from our planning department and our ED department. And I say that only just to say, if we, based on what we may find out or may not find out from our attorney's office, I'm not sure we want to go down this path of convening people until we know that knowledge, but just a thought there.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Weidman. Any other questions from the members of the committee?
Yes, I'm sorry, real quick. So, Ms. Wyman, when you say convening people, you mean the ad hoc committee, right?
Councilmember Wallington, you're recognized.
Oh, I just want to make sure I understand that, Ms. Wyman, when you say convening people, you mean the ad hoc committee?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, got it, okay.
Councilmember Bakari, any questions, comments?
I'm not sure what's going on anymore, but I guess the punchline is like, I'm not opposed to exploring something that I think I know already the answer, but I'm open to seeing maybe there's another angle or I'm wrong. But like, the formality of closed sessions and talking in attorney-client privilege, like someone just like needs to go have a conversation with the attorney and see if there's something, because to me, this is like us going into closed session to discuss building a communication device for aliens. Like, I'm pretty sure we don't need that, but maybe someone could convince me. I think we're just adding a whole bunch of steps and things of like, someone go see if the attorney says, yeah, I think there's an angle here, because I don't believe there is at this point.
That's not the job.
Mr. Winston, Mr. Bakari has the floor.
So at the end of the day, like, I want a solution here, and I'd love a solution where we found an angle for an ordinance that made sense. So somebody's got to go do that. If it is this advisory group of all the stakeholders who know all the angles, they could come up, and if they could find a unified solution that was both carrots and sticks, as we've been talking about them here, ordinance and ways to make it smooth, like, that's amazing. That would be great. But somebody's got to, like, they just got to get to work. And I'm happy to work. I'm happy to brainstorm or help. But this is going to take all of our minds, and that's the action. So, I mean, we're not going to solve it publicly in a committee like this, just kind of bouncing around thoughts. Someone's got to go do research and work. So that's the only action I'll support until somebody comes up with a better one, but I haven't heard one yet.
I thought that was the action.
And Councilmember Wallington, then I'll make a comment.
I was under the impression that was the action that we were taking. It was, okay, all right.
Well, the action is, I'm sorry, Ms. Wallington, are you done? Thank you. The action is that we accept the staff recommendation, right? That's been outlined here. Mr. Winston motion added a caveat that we have a conversation or a closed door session with our attorney to talk about legal options, which is something that was not recommended. I kind of concur with Mr. Bakari. I think I already know where the answers will fall. I'm not sure that a conversation with our attorney on this matter needs a motion, that we have to formalize that. I think we just kind of get off the committee meeting and call them and say, hey, we want to have a conversation with the council, which I think the appropriate thing would probably be for that to come from the field council versus a committee. But that's aside. I think the field council should make that type of request to have an attorney client conversation with the attorney, not a subcommittee of the council. But that's more procedural than anything. But I think the answer is already there. We've had in our previous conversations with the city attorney present in November as well as in December, where he kind of told us this thing was going. And he said it very publicly. And I'm not sure that anything he was going to tell us privately will be any different than what he has given us already. But that's just me. Mr. Winston. So
it is when I don't know if we're talking the same language. I don't think we're communicating in the correct fashion. The job of our lawyers is to defend, our work, the decisions that we make. So it's not necessarily his legal take on, we're not going to go and sue anybody. That is not the strategy that, what might be suggested here. The idea is to say, okay, if we change, we know what the ordinance change sounds like. It's changing a word, right? It's changing words. It's not a lot of poetry to put in here to figure out some kind of excellent ordinance that is going to, not be challenged. It's when we go into this and say, well, what can we expect? And then we hit them basically with a Socratic method, employing the Socratic method. Okay, well, what if we change this? What if we change this? What if we do this work, do with this work? How do you create a strategy so that it is able to foresee the challenges that are going to come, and what steps can we take and put in place from a policy standpoint that are going to minimize the risk? That is an attorney's job, and we are the group that I think that needs to do this work to make the change. The change that needs to be made is in our local ordinance. We're not going to find it anywhere else. So I don't know. I think that's how we are the ones who have to do the work to figure it out, and it's us with our lawyers figuring out how to deal with what will come when the necessary changes are made. Regardless of all the common ground meetings that we have with different groups moving forward, the crux of it is going to be when business practices hit conditions that are made by local ordinance.
Okay, I have a great idea. Let's allow Anna to weigh in on the.
One more thing I wanted to say to your point, though. Again, this is a recommendation to the city council for us to consider. The full council would still have to decide, right? Like, hey, is this something that kind of we want to go about?
Point well taken. Anna?
Yes. Hold on. Let me turn on my camera. So I don't want to speak for Patrick, because obviously I'm not Patrick and I'm not the city attorney, but he and I have spoken at length on this issue, and we've obviously looked into it. I'm sure he would not object to talking with the full council on this issue in closed session. I'm not sure that the legal analysis that we've provided is going to change. And I would say that from a defense standpoint of making an amendment to the Fair Housing Ordinance to include SOID, certainly, I think we had somewhat of the discussion like this around the access to capital grants as well. The stronger the business case that we can make for it, obviously, the stronger our defense becomes if it's challenged. So I'm not sure what a closed session will provide that won't require additional information in the long run.
Okay, so it's 1:46. I think we've had a lot of good discussion around the table. And so let's do this. There's a motion on the table that's been made by Councilmember Winston, second by Councilmember Wallington, that we accept the staff recommendation as outlined and amended. In addition to that, we make a recommendation to the full council that we have a closed door session to confer with our attorney about legal implications regarding a source of income ordinance. That's how I read the motion that's on the floor. Calling the question. All those in favor, I'll do a roll call. Councilmember Winston?
Aye.
Councilmember Wallington?
Yes.
Councilmember Bakari?
No.
Councilmember Graham votes yes. That's approved, 3-1. So take that to full council. I think that's the end of our meeting. Does anyone have any additional questions, comments, concerns?
So now, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
So now, we're going to bring forth staff's recommendation, which I am supportive of exploring, but we're also going to bring a recommendation to council to go to closed session, and the council decides on that. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay, understood.
All right. So we made some progress on Soy. We made some progress on reentry and the nuisance abatements ordinance. We got a great update as well. I want to thank the committee for your time, patience, and staff for putting the work together. Thank the public for viewing, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.